So welcome to Empowering Literacy, Building a Collaborative Approach in British Columbia, session 3. We are halfway through this amazing series. So I do want to start off with a land acknowledgement this evening. With gratitude and respect, we acknowledge the unceded shared traditional territories across British Columbia on whose lands we live, work, and play. And I am joining you from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Secwepemc peoples here in Williams Lake, which is the home of the Orange Shirt Society. A lot of people don't know that about Williams Lake, but if you're wearing an orange shirt at any time throughout the year, Williams Lake deserves the credit, and Phyllis Webstad in particular for that. So I want to give a shout out to her. All right, so our agenda tonight is very similar to our previous agendas, but we do have one special adjustment for this evening. So we have an about us and purpose and goals of the series. And then we are very, very happy to be able to welcome opening remarks from Premier David Eby, joining us for a brief time this evening. We've got a knowledge building section on assessment. That's our focus for this evening. And then we've got our discussion room breakout. And then once again, if you are feeling unsure about sticking around for the discussion groups, remember that you're welcome to participate or just hang back and listen. We encourage discussion. We want it to be a safe space for everyone to feel like they have a voice and have an opportunity to talk. So just make sure that if you do stop, pause for the discussion room, come back and join us for the panel discussion. We've got special guests from Coast Mountain School District 82 joining us this evening. And of course, we have prizes. So if you stick around to the very end, you are eligible to win the prize that we have for tonight. All right, so a little bit about us. So this series is being sponsored or hosted or put together by Dyslexia Canada, which is a national charity, and it's committed to ensuring that every child in Canada with dyslexia receives a fair and equitable education. They advocate for evidence-based practices and policies to be implemented within public education to ensure that every child receives the instruction and support they need to succeed with literacy. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm Melanie Berg. I'm a licensed school psychologist here in British Columbia. I'm also a BC certified teacher. At this point, with 25 years in public education, I'm about 50-50 on both of those. So this is the year that I can't say that I've been a teacher as long as I've been a school psychologist. It's going to flip. But I am still actively involved in schools and in teaching. I'm a senior instructor at the School of Education at the University of Northern British Columbia. And joining me tonight is Alicia Smith, the Executive Director of Dyslexia Canada. I'm fighting a nasty bug as well, so if you see my screen fade to black, she will hop in and rescue me. I'm taking a pause to probably cough. All right, so tonight we've got purpose and goals of the workshop series. So once again, we are here to connect educators interested in improving equity in literacy and outcomes across BC, to celebrate success, and to identify common challenges and share strategies for overcoming barriers. We also hope to empower educators in BC to lead change within their sphere of influence, whatever their role may be. And we hope to help Dyslexia Canada further understand the needs of BC educators to inform their advocacy. And with that, I will turn it over and send again warmest welcome to Premier David Eby. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks so much for having me. It's great to see everybody here on the call tonight. I know it's a really busy time of year for teachers. I was raised by a teacher, and I know this time of year, and a principal eventually. And I know it's report card time, and everyone's getting a little bit crazy in class, and I'm grateful for it. I also heard a few parents on the call before everybody was muted, talking about bedtime and getting the team ready. We're at that point at our house too right now. So thanks for taking time out of your busy lives to learn more and develop more as teachers, so you can support BC students. I was really glad to be invited by Alicia and Melanie and the team at Dyslexia Canada to provide opening remarks, because Dyslexia Canada has been so central to our work in British Columbia around what we're trying to do in ensuring that teachers have the tools they need to support our kids with the critical piece of learning reading and writing. I can say with some experience as a parent, I've had that moment of going into the classroom and thinking my kid's on track, and then seeing comparisons of writing and just being like, oh my gosh, what happened here? And for our family, we're okay. We have those opportunities. Other families don't always have those opportunities. So provincially, we wanted to make sure that every family, that every kid has the opportunity to be successful in school with early reading and writing skills. And we really wanted to do it from an evidence-based perspective. And that's where Dyslexia Canada really assisted the Ministry of Education in designing some of what actually I understand you're going to be learning a little bit about tonight, about that early screening from kindergarten to grade 3, that evidence-based screening, which some school boards have already rolled out in BC, but we want to make it universal across the province so that every kid is identified early who's struggling in some way, so that we can intervene early by supporting teachers and support staff with the training that they need to support those kids. So it's two parts. It's the screening, but it's also the professional development for teachers and support staff to intervene early, because we know if we're successful early, we save a lot of stress and fear and anxiety for kids in school. They love school again. They want to learn, and we avoid a lot of behavioral problems, but also build esteem and success for kids going forward. And we avoid a lot of really expensive challenges down the road. All of this, the whole thing depends on teachers. It really does, and the critical support team at schools. And so thank you for doing this on your own time. Thank you for taking time away from your families and report cards to learn more about this. And I just wanted to make sure that you knew that you've got a supporter in government to do this work for kids, to make our kids as successful as possible. And I wanted to make sure that you knew how grateful I was to Dyslexia Canada and their team for the support of the work that we're doing together with the whole community that's really quite expert in this area and assisting us in supporting kids as well. So thanks for all you do. Good luck with those report cards, and good luck with those kids, more importantly. And I won't take up any more of your important time. Have a wonderful course tonight. And thanks again for the brief amount of time to say hi and thank you tonight.
Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and join us. We know that you have an entire province to run with a lot of different issues competing for your time. And I know I speak on behalf of everyone when I say thank you so much for the attention that you have paid to reading and for your presence here tonight. We really do appreciate it. So moving on with the presentation, we like to start off these workshops with good news, what we know so far. And this is information that we've gathered from the survey that we asked you to participate in when you registered for the workshop series. Thank you to everyone for filling that out. We also have some good news in general. So the first good news is that the province of British Columbia has committed $30 million to universal early screening and outreach and training for teachers. That's fantastic news. The other great news is that we have now bumped our registration for the series up to 575 educators who are excited about connecting with other educators in British Columbia to dig into the science of reading and learn how to improve equity through literacy. So that is very exciting. Now we have some not so great news coming out of the survey. So one of the questions that we asked was around assessment tools. Tonight's theme is assessment tools. So we asked you all how you're feeling about the effectiveness of the assessment tools that you have access to currently. So in response to this, 60% of you indicated that you were either very dissatisfied or dissatisfied. You thought the tools were very poor or poor. 23% thought the tools were, 23% felt that the tools were...
Or we could go...
Neither had a neutral opinion. Only 13% thought the tools were good, and 4% thought that they had excellent tools at their disposal currently. So that is not great news. We also asked, what are the tools that you have access to currently within your school districts? So we had a whole list of different tools, and we asked you to select all that applied. We then went through all of the results of the survey, including the places where people wrote in additional assessments, and we grouped them into different types of assessment. So the most popular type of assessment that we found that is being used in British Columbia right now are assessments of reading levels or running records, such as the PM benchmark assessments, the Fountas and Pinnell benchmark assessment system, the DART, which is quite popular in some districts here, or the DRA assessment. So we found that 82% of respondents said that these assessments are being used in your school boards currently. 14% said that they are not in use in their districts, and 4% of you were not sure. Now, when we asked about access, do you have access to evidence-based screening tools within your school district? Examples of those were Acadience, Dibbles, EasyCBM, ABES, WED Plus, and M-Class. Those are things that were mentioned by people responding to the survey. We found that only 31% of survey respondents said that they currently have access to those tools within their school districts. 64% do not have access to those tools now. And again, 5% of respondents were not sure. So we're going to now do a little live audience feedback and participation. So if everyone could do their best to scan this QR code or go to menti.com and enter the code that's on the screen, we're going to do another Mentimeter because we did have so much fun with last week's Mentimeter about the science of reading. So let me just get a new share going for the Menti. Great. Excellent. So if you could please, the first question is, what is structured literacy? And we'd like you to go to that link and just start putting in the first 3 words that pop into your head when you're asked, what is structured literacy? Oh, this is great. Systematic, it's explicit, it's methodical, it's evidence-informed. I love it. It's sequential, brain-friendly, good for kids. I like that. Guided, ensures all learners' needs. Beneficial for all. I love it. Systematic, explicit, and evidence-based. Those words are popping up really nicely. We'll let this go for another second. Equitable, I love it. Scope and sequence, science-based, evidence-informed, comprehensive, all great words to describe structured literacy. Okay, now we're going to move on to our next question. The next question, are you required or feeling pressured to use students' reading levels as assessments? We noticed in the survey results that many of you said that you are required to do leveled assessments and to submit that data to your districts, but you yourself have chosen to use an evidence-based screening tool. So we applaud you if you're in that boat. You're, having to do additional work, but yes, and for a lot of you, we recognize that that doesn't necessarily apply in your role. If you're not a classroom teacher, that wouldn't be one that would apply. So it's looking like about 44% yes, a third no, or 28% no. Great, excellent. Our next question, has your school or district provided you with training in how to use those evidence-based screening tools? And again, this is, has your school district done this? Because we did note in the survey that there were a lot of individual educators who've gone out and got the training on their own time and on their own dime. So we're really curious here, is this something that your district has provided to you at this point? No, 62% no, 63% no. Well, it's wonderful that the province has just committed $30 million of funding. So hopefully that training will be coming your way soon.
Yeah, hopefully we'll see that number change.
Yes, we are hoping to see that number change. Absolutely. Okay, thank you everyone for participating. And with that, I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint and turn it over to Melanie.
Okay, so just to recap from our first 2 sessions, the first session we did an overview of what the science of reading is and what it is not, basically highlighting that it's decades of interdisciplinary research, highlighting how reading develops and establishes characteristics of effective reading instruction, assessment, and intervention. The second session focused on what structured literacy is, and we talked a little bit about what it is not as well. So structured literacy is an evidence-based instructional approach that falls under the umbrella of, encompasses a lot of what is talked about and what we've learned from the science of reading. And it it informs us about what is taught and how to teach it as well. So tonight we're going to branch into assessment, but we can't talk about assessment on its own. It really is a part of what we consider what we refer to as multi-tiered systems of support. And MTSS for short is the model of schools and boards to provide structured literacy. It includes tiered instruction, database decision making through collaborative problem solving, and shared leadership. So in order to have data, you have to do assessments. So a key piece of that is universal screening. And so we're going to talk about universal screening, but within that broader umbrella of the assessment process in general, when we're looking at trying to gather data to drive our instruction. So the first thing is to identify the students, the students that are at risk, who are at risk. And we refer to that as universal screening. That's the very first step. The second step is to determine the individual needs of those students. Once we identify who is at risk, we need to do some specific, more diagnostic testing to figure out what is going on with those students. So diagnostic assessment, often as a school psychologist, when people think of diagnostic assessment, they think of people like me coming in and doing an assessment to diagnose something. But really what we're trying to diagnose is what is going on underneath those markers that we see in the universal screening so that we can develop our instruction and act in a preventative way to address those needs that students are showing. And the next step is planning and implementing instruction. So once we have identified what the specific needs are of those individual students, we are able to then plan and implement instruction. And a part of that is evaluating it as we go. And in order to evaluate, we have to progress monitor. So a lot of those same very brief probes that we use in universal screening, they will have multiple forms, and we can use those same tools to monitor students' progress over the course of the year at different points of the year with different levels of frequency depending on the needs of that student as well. And we make changes to our instruction depending on what we're seeing. So that is an outcomes-driven model. We're using the data to tell us what we need to do in terms of our instruction to make sure students are getting what they need and nobody's left behind. We aren't moving on too soon for a lot of students. And then universal screening is basically a fancy term to say that everybody gets this. It's screening which identifies which students and which systems are at risk. So when we're thinking about MTSS, we are talking about the general classroom level, we're talking about the district level, we're talking about the school level. And within MTS, we have different tiers as well. And so a screener, in order to let us know who's at risk and which systems are at risk, we need it to be very quick, right? It needs to be fast. If we're going to be doing this with everybody, it's not something that we can spend 20 to 30 minutes for each child on. It has to be quick. It also needs to be reliable and valid. And we're going to get into a little bit about what those two terms mean. But basically, we need to know that the assessments are assessing what they are supposed to, and that if we had different people doing them, we would get the same results. We also need to make sure that they are indicators, they're assessing indicators of essential literacy skills. If we aren't assessing the things that we know are correlated with later literacy development and strong reading and writing skills, that is going to be an issue for us because it's not going to give us that clear indicator or that clear measure of who's actually at risk for what. And then and in that way, it's also predictive. So those are the four key pieces of universal screening that we need to make sure are included in the tools that we're using. So just a couple of examples of universal screeners to give you a measure. If you're not familiar with some of the more common universal screeners, we've chosen Acadience and Dibbles 8 to highlight tonight because they're two of the most common, well-researched assessment tools that are out there. And you can see from these charts that if you are doing these most foundational aspects of these assessments, you're looking at 3 to 8 minutes maximum with Acadience, and about 4 to 6 or 7 minutes for for Dibbles. And some of these assessments can be administered in groups, and some of them are individual. It just depends on what it is that you're assessing. So they are very, very quick and not intended to take up a whole lot of time. They're also very teacher friendly. Once you know how to use them, you don't have to have a level B course or be a school psychologist to administer these tests. They're very, very quick. So reliability and validity are two really important terms. Reliability refers to the consistency of a measure, whether the results can be reproduced. So does the tool yield the consistent results regardless of who does the assessment? That's a very, very important factor when we're looking at assessment tools. Validity asks us to consider what it is that, sorry, my screen is flipping around all over beside me here. Validity refers to the accuracy of a measure, whether results really do represent what they were supposed to measure. So if we don't know that, we won't actually know which students are at risk for reading difficulty. So we have to be assured that this, whatever we're using, is actually going to give us the data that we need. So if you have questions about whether or not the tools you're using are reliable and valid, it's your assessment measures should come with a technical manual, and that will provide the information about the validity and reliability. And if there isn't a technical manual, that might be a red flag. That might be something that you need to then ask some questions about. And then on to the next slide. All right, so what are the indicators of early reading skills? So these are the minimum measures that were recommended by the Ontario Human Rights Commission. We know that there are a number of other essential reading skills that are involved in reading. These ones are highly correlated with later reading results, and we can use these kind of as a thermometer, like a temperature check, to see how students are doing overall. So we're not tapping into every skill or assessing every aspect of reading, but we're looking at a handful of specific skills that research has found to provide to be a good indicator of the child's overall skill level. So kindergarten, we're looking at letter knowledge and phonemic awareness. In grade 1, it's phonemic awareness, decoding, and word identification. And then and then oral reading fluency as you get later into grade 1 as well. And then grade 2 and beyond, it's oral reading fluency. So again, this is not meant to give the impression that you are looking at every aspect of reading. Remember, this is the temperature check. So when we go to the doctor and we find out that we have a fever, the doctor doesn't know what's wrong, but he then knows he needs to do more diagnostic tests to figure out what is the source of that fever. So this is basically giving us an overall measure of the literacy health of our students. And if we have students that are showing that they are struggling in a certain area, it gives us the information we need, that we need to dig deeper. And because it's so quick, it could be that a child's just had an off day. Maybe they're working with someone they didn't know, or they didn't get enough sleep that night before, or they had an upset stomach, or weren't feeling well. Whatever the issue is, it's so quick that once you are collecting this data over time, if you suspect that it's inaccurate, you can re-administer it. And if you do decide to do a deeper probe to figure out what's going on for that student, that is going to confirm or that there is something going on or not. And then you plan accordingly based on those results. So the real strength here is the power of prediction. Providing the indicators of early basic skills is key, because we need to know who is on track and who isn't if we're going to change the outcomes with instruction. Students can be screened before they even start to learn to read, allowing more targeted instruction or early intervention if necessary. So this is really about prevention. A lot of students who end up being referred for school psychology assessments, for example, if they had been screened and progress monitored and instruction was adjusted and targeted to meet their needs the whole way along, often those students would not need to be referred for school psychology services down the road. So it really is about prevention and making sure that we're providing students with what they need. And even if students are diagnosed with something, this doesn't change. You're still doing this for all of the students. And so many of the screening tools are built from longitudinal outcome data. We know that researchers have followed groups of students over a long period of time, determining who has become skilled readers. That is how they know what the strong indicators are of those skills. So we can statistically determine what those skills are and how much of the skill a certain student should have at a certain time. That's why it's important to have norms, so that you can compare and see where a student is compared to other students their age. And now it's really important, of course, to have some non-examples. So we've got some good tools out there that we see out in our schools, and things like the Core Phonics Survey. It's a great tool, but it's a diagnostic tool. So many of the tools that were mentioned in the survey results, they do give us really good information, but they're more in terms of what is going on for that individual student and help us to plan our instruction. They aren't screening tools. They're meant to give us that overall temperature check of whether or not there's an issue. So, for example, phonological awareness assessments, spelling inventories, or something like the Core Phonics Survey, those are things that they really give us the diagnostic information so that we can plan our instruction, but they're not meant to give us that quick temperature check. They take quite a bit more time to administer. And these are some of the common assessments that we know from the survey people are seeing in their schools and using. I've certainly used these as well and seen them in a lot of files of the students who I review, who come to me for assessments. These are the most common assessments that we tend to see. These are all running record-based or leveled reading-based assessments. And one primary issue with these is that they're based on 3 cueing theory, which is a flawed theory about how students learn to read. We talked about that. I think it was in our previous session. It might have been session 1. So there's also methodological issues with these as well that we know very clearly stemming from research. We've got some great links in the document to go out for tonight as well if you're interested in what is going on, like why are these assessments not great for screening. We can send you some additional reading on that to find out more about that if you wish. So the Fountas and Purnell benchmark assessment system in particular was found to be only 54% effective of future reading difficulty in grades 2 and 3 students. So it's about as effective as flipping a coin. And we want to make sure we have much more predictive results than that. That's really not something that is what we want to see when we're looking at screening assessments. All right. So universal screening identifies which students and which systems are at risk. So again, to recap, they should be fast, they should be reliable and valid, they should be indicators of essential early literacy skills, and they should be predictive. So universal screening answers the question of who needs support. The next question is, what should that support be? And this is answered by diagnostic assessment. And then the third part of we're going to dive into this a little bit. All right, so screening and diagnostic assessments. So again, which students are at risk and which systems are at risk. So if the data tells us that we've got a whole number of students that are all like more than 20% of students are struggling with a particular aspect, that's a reflection of tier 1 instruction. So then we can look at what's going on in our tier 1 instruction. Do we need different materials? Do we need different students grouped in different ways? There's all kinds of reasons why tier 1 can be the source or have some difficulty. And so if we look at those different systems that are involved, we can really figure that out and get that good information that we need. And then the diagnostic aspect of that, for which students are at risk, what content skill or skills are proficient. So we know we can get a very good sense of what does the student know, and then what do I need to teach next? So where are they having difficulty before we move on? All right. So screening is for all students. Diagnostic is for some students. You're not going to be doing diagnostic assessments with all of your students. It does take a bit more time to do, and the time that it takes will vary depending on the student's need. Screening is done 2 to 3 times per year, and diagnostic is done once. It is fast. Screening is fast, research-validated tools, and diagnostic is longer, and it can often be unstandardized. And all students are screened with the same measures. And for diagnostic assessments chosen strategically based on patterns in screening. Just a quick note about things being standardized. Often our universal screening measures are standardized. Standardization sometimes gets a bad rap, I find, but it's really important because we want to make sure that we are delivering our assessment tools in the same way to every student, because it actually helps reduce that bias. Often, I know when I was a special education teacher, inclusive education teacher, you want to help your students. It's really hard to watch them struggle. And so, when you see them struggling, if you're not working with a standardized tool, we can sometimes prompt them. Like even with standardized tools, we can sometimes prompt them. But when you have a set of rules to follow and things are administered the same way to every student, it allows us to be able to compare that student's results with the other student's results. So it's really important to not label something as standardized as being universally not good for kids. Standardization can be really helpful when we're trying to find out specific information. So who needs support? That's determined by universal screening. What should that support be is determined by diagnostic assessment. And is the support working? That is all about the progress monitoring. So this last chart, we've included this chart as an example of progress monitoring graph. So for those of you who aren't familiar, so what you can see here is that the first aim line, which is the diagonal line. This represents the expected growth in order for the student to reach the goal that has been set. So each X represents a progress monitoring measure being administered. Again, it's quick, easy, reliable, 1 minute. So in January, you can see there were 4 measures given, so about 1 a week. So progress monitoring is usually done every 2 weeks, but you can see that the first 4 points are below, at or below the aim line. So then the intervention was changed. And that's what's represented by the red line. So we changed something. So now we do some more progress monitoring. We do instruction, instruction, instruction. We keep going. And we then do some more progress monitoring. And we can see that the trajectory of the students starts to look different. They are now responding to instruction and showing growth. So we can see that in February, there was about 3 assessments. March, we had a couple. We've got spring break in there, so it makes sense that that would go down. April, May, June. So generally, you're looking for 3 measures of progress monitoring above the gray line to know that what you're doing is really having an impact and that student is on goal to reach their target, which is the end. So progress monitoring, again, is done about every 2 weeks, but it could be more frequently, could be once a week, depending on how intensive that instruction is that the student is getting. So student in an MTS model, students who are receiving tier 3 instruction, it's more intense. It isn't necessarily something different that they're getting at tier 3, but it's more intense. And that's what you're going to see reflected in your progress monitoring with the frequency that you are doing that progress monitoring. So progress monitoring measures are sensitive to tiny changes, and that's really, really important if it's going to help us to guide our instruction. So pulling it all together, universal screening is for all students 2 to 3 times a year. It's fast, reliable, and valid indicators. And it lets us know who is at risk. And this isn't, we're talking primarily, the Ministry of Education's $30 million is talking about universal screening for K to 3, which is absolutely critical in terms of prevention. But we can do universal screening beyond the elementary primary grades as well. So Acadia and St. Dibbles both go up into the middle school grades. And they can be used, although the norms aren't quite, the norms wouldn't be necessarily applicable, but you can use those for monitoring as well into the upper grades as well. Diagnostic assessment, again, is for some students. It's once a year, it's longer, it's often unstandardized assessment of skills. So you're really trying to get an understanding of what is going on for the student. You're looking closely at their spelling patterns. You are asking them to write for you. You're asking them to read out loud. You're doing all of these things depending on what is going on for that student, because that's going to help you identify what skills need to be taught. And then the progress monitoring is, again, for some students, those students that are getting the diagnostic assessment, or they're showing that they are not responding to instruction. That's where you want to keep doing that progress monitoring. It's going to be some students weekly or bi-weekly, very brief measures of targeted skills to let you know if your instruction is working. Yeah. All right. So we are on to our group activity. And so again, we will have breakout rooms automatically assigned. And so if you can please introduce yourselves, we would encourage you to have your cameras on, to be turned on to promote dialogue. But if you are feeling nervous or shy and you just want to listen in, that is okay. We would encourage you to do that as well. Open the Google folder. The link will be in the chat. Yeah, it's gone into the chat right now. I can see, so that's great. So choose the Google document with your room number, and you will have 20 minutes for discussion and response. And everyone is encouraged to record at least one response on the group document, the activity that we have for you tonight. And I do want to say as well, just remember that we definitely want you to feel welcome in the group and welcome to contribute. Make sure that you make space for others, but don't feel, please feel encouraged to share your opinions and your thoughts as well. Good. Okay. So before we jump into our panel, I could see in my peripheral vision that there was a lot of questions coming through in the chat, and I just wanted to scan through and try to address some of them very, very quickly. I'm not going to be able to address all of them in detail, but we will provide links in the Google Doc. So if you're wondering about things like the connection between reading comprehension, like where's the measure of reading comprehension in a screener, for example. Reading comprehension is highly correlated with oral reading fluency, and Jan Hasbrook has done a number of studies and a lot of work around this area. Also, what we showed you is just a very snippet of what's available in these screeners. So there are measures like MAISE, which is directly more of a direct measure of reading comprehension as well. And Acadience in particular is working on a vocabulary measure as well. So these things are continuing to be developed so that they can become broader in the sense of tools that we have, so that we're hitting all of the essential skills. And the essential skills are really those 5 pillars, right? So when we're thinking about essential skills, this again is a thermometer, and it's a quick measure to let us know if there may be an underlying problem. That's really what the purpose of this is. And then we drill down and we get deeper into those. And just because our screeners don't have a specific subtest called reading comprehension, that doesn't mean that we're not addressing reading comprehension in our instruction. We are doing all of those things. But again, when we look at reading through scientific models like the Simple View of Reading and Scarborough's Rope, if you're coming from that foundation and you're coming from that understanding that reading is a number of different specific skills all woven together to result in this thing called reading comprehension, is actually really difficult to assess reading comprehension as an entity, because it is so reliant on background knowledge, on fluency, on all of these different things. So if we just measure reading comprehension, we don't actually know what specific aspect is causing difficulty if a student has difficulty with reading comprehension. Another thing that we see with measures of reading comprehension is that a lot of students who have difficulty at the word reading level, if reading is not timed, if there's not some type of fluency aspect to it and it isn't oral, they will, if they're reading silently, they will reread. They will reread over and over again. They will use context to figure things out. We don't know if, they may come out. I see this all the time when I do achievement assessments with students. They come out with a pretty close to average score or average range score on reading comprehension, but their word reading, decoding or nonsense word decoding and reading fluency scores are really, really low. Well, how is that possible? And most of the time, almost all the time, they're reading silently. They're not reading out loud. So they're rereading multiple times, and these things aren't timed. So reading comprehension can mask those underlying difficulties. And I've had some teachers say, well, isn't that the most important thing though? Like, does it matter if they aren't reading quickly? Ask the student if it matters if they're reading quickly. When you're in grade 10 and you can't ever get your homework done, and you don't want to read out loud, and you're riddled with anxiety because you think you might be called on out loud, when you can't read with fluency and you can't access the words, you can't lift the words off the page and keep up with your assignments, it's really, really difficult. So yeah, so I just wanted to make that note about reading comprehension in particular. And the other thing I wanted to mention before we get into our panel as well is just around the US norms. we have a lot of Canadian provinces that are using these tools. Acadians has developed a French version as well for French immersion. So, you know, there's real advantages to using these tools. When we do Canadian assessments of like larger assessments of academic achievement, like the Wyatt and the KTA and things like that, often we develop Canadian norms because Canadian students tend to perform better than Americans. So we need a whole different set of norms. So I don't know. There's nothing to suggest that there's a huge risk of norms being that significantly different in the US. And honestly, if we are teaching to the skills, if we are addressing the skills that students are developing through that science-informed lens, and we're making sure that we're hitting all of those aspects of the pillars, the essential skills of reading, the most important thing is that you're seeing that progress go up. So, you know, if you notice as a whole for your whole class or your whole school that the norms are universally lower, you can actually develop norms for your own school. It takes some skill and you need probably support to be able to do that. But these are highly these tools, they have technical manuals. They have Acadience, I know, has a particular paper around the use of Acadience with English learners, with diverse learners, with students that are hearing impaired, that have learning disabilities, cognitive disabilities. There's a lot of research that's gone into developing these assessments and the norms that are around them. So I think we can use them with a lot of confidence. And as long as we are moving students forward, that's the whole big goal. And it's going to help us to identify who's at risk, and then our individual probing, figuring out what that child needs is going to be the ticket to seeing them move forward in future progress monitoring and future assessments of their when they're screened. So there's lots of other things, lots of other questions that came up that I can't get to, but I know there was one about MTSS as well. That's our topic for next week. And I do want to now flip over to our guests if they are ready. I would like to welcome from Coast Mountain School District 82, Geraldine Lauder, Director of Instruction at Graduation and Innovation and District Principal of Early Learning and French Immersion, Tina McDonald. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having us.
Good. And how is everything looking? You can see everything normally and how it should be?
Yes,
Oh,
now
good.
we can.
Good.
Yeah, we had lost the whole screen.
Yeah.
It was
Oh,
black.
Okay, good. Well, I'm glad you can see it now. So we brought you in tonight because you are working in a district that has really made some big changes in recent years in terms of assessment and screening, and just the way that you're supporting teachers, and a lot of the things that you're doing are really different. So tell us a little bit about your district. What is it like in Coast Mountains 82?
Okay, so I'll start. So I want to first gratefully acknowledge that we are joining you today from the unceded traditional territories of the Tsimshian people, and that Coast Mountain School District conducts our business on the territories of the Tsimshian, the Haisla, the Gitxsan, and the Niska. And we acknowledge the strength of the ancestors, elders, knowledge holders, emerging leaders, and rights holders, and the histories, language, and cultures, protocols that continue to guide and sustain First Peoples. So a little bit about Coast Mountain School District. Our catchment area covers approximately 90,000 square kilometers, which is about the size of the country of Finland. And the communities that we serve include Stewart, which is right up near Hyder, Alaska, the Hazeltons, Kitwanga, Terrace, Thornhill, and Kitimat. We employ about 800 employees across that space. We have about 4,300 learners. We have 19 schools, and about 48% of our learners are Indigenous. So, and hi, Charlotte, nice to see you.
Yeah, there's probably some familiar faces in there.
Yes, we did see a few, yeah.
Yeah. And I have to disclose too that these are familiar faces for me in Coast Mountain School District 82 because I was there for 5 years. So, and currently at UNBC, the regional program, teacher education program, the majority of my students are actually based in Terrace as well. So I'm thrilled that they're graduating. This is working with the second cohort now that's graduating into a district that is supporting structured literacy, and they're coming out with a knowledge base that a lot of the classrooms they're going into for their practicums, and then when they go out to work as well, they're already on the road to this, and it's just so wonderful to see. So what prompted you to make the changes to the assessment tools that you were using, and what were those changes?
So last fall, so about October of 2023, Erin Callahan, who is our superintendent, asked me to review the literacy data. And again, at that time, we were using PM benchmarks. When I went through the data and looked at how our students were performing with the level data, as mentioned and often in the chats and etc., I noticed that when we're looking at the RTI triangle, we were completely reversed on its axis, where approximately 80% of our students were not meeting benchmarks. So this was huge concern, and then when we dissected it further, we noticed that our Indigenous students were among the majority, the majority of our Indigenous students were falling in that 80%. So this was a huge cause for alarm, and we decided that we needed to do something. So the superintendent, the directors, and myself decided that we needed to figure out what we were going to do. We decided we were going to do a plan and how we were going to address these changes. So where we began was I started to do an elaborate search of different programming that would support with the structured literacy approach. And so we looked at Haggerty, UFly, Joyful Literacy, Core Phonics, and a few more that we had gone through. And we had many of our teachers already using the Haggerty before it was revamped, the old style Haggerty. And then UFly also was one of the ones that had rose to the top programs that we wanted to know more about. And the more that we dove into it and looked at the 5 pillars, we decided that UFly was and a cost analysis was a key factor as well. We decided that UFly would be a little bit of a better program for our district to take on. We wanted to know more about how the programs targeted the 5 pillars, and it was in that moment that we saw that UFly aligned the best where we were heading with the district. Let me think what. So we also at that time, we had teachers that were coming and speaking to Geraldine about the current assessment tools that we were using. And as mentioned, it was PM benchmarks, and they had some concerns, and they were looking for something that was a little bit more aligned, also that was less onerous. A lot of the conversations I had with my early learning was, why are we doing this in kindergarten? They're not readers in October, but yet we're supposed to be doing these assessments. So there was a whole bunch of discussions that went into it. And then when we decided how we were going to proceed with our assessment tools, what we did was we generated a list of all different types of assessment tools that we could use, such as Core Phonics, Dibbles, Acadience, Achieve 3000, MAP, PALS, Easy CBM. And then we provided that list with some information on all of them to our principal, our PVP group. And then we asked them to generate a list of 3 that they thought would be the most effective for our district. From there, we ended up creating a teacher focus group, which consisted of teachers from the K-3 division, administrators, and any learning resource teachers that wanted to be a part of that. And then we offered that up to them to view as well, and they came back with Acadience. They wanted to do the Acadience online, and upon further review, we have a literacy lead teacher that was working alongside of us that we hired for this year, and she became part of that group as well, that she would have input in that. And then once we had the tools that we were looking to put in place, then we started looking at a 3-year plan that we would look at starting to roll out in September of 2023. So right now, our 3-year plan is being condensed into a lot quicker time frame because we have a lot of interest in it, and also so far we've trained over 50 teachers in Acadience this year. So we've been doing in-service for the most of the spring with our teachers to get them ready to roll it out for them individually in the classrooms next year.
It's amazing. And it started out with your inclusion or learning support teachers, right? And now, so you've expanded
Yes.
it to, that's fantastic. That's amazing.
Yeah, our
So-
district, one thing I'd add to that is last year when we were just talking about it, Julie Nakars, who's our director of learner support, she had given us some of her FTE to put towards literacy support. So those are the people that we were getting trained in the school to support with us on this journey.
Yeah. So how did you get started? Like, how were you able to implement these changes?
Okay, so Tina and I started this journey by heading to Nova Scotia, and we went there in February of 2023. We were asked to go specifically to New Glasgow because our superintendent, who was our new superintendent, had recently joined our district and was coming to us from Nova Scotia. And while we were there, we visited 3 elementary schools. We spoke with admin, the classroom teachers, LRTs, SLPs, and school psychologists, and we got to watch UFly in action. We were very impressed with the level of engagement of all students, including those who had designations, and we saw that it was adaptable to student needs and had multiple access points. We also noticed that teachers, from the very experienced teachers to the very new teachers, were finding success with UFly. And we were also, while we were there, very honored to be welcomed at Mount St. Vincent University, where we got to have a private session with Dr. Jamie Metzala. And she shared with us her passion with regard to the right to read and equity and literacy. And she spoke to us specifically about Acadience and UFly. And it was very inspiring to us, and it was really the catalyst. We were so excited as we headed back. So after the visit, when we got back to BC, we felt we truly had our purpose now outlined for us, and we came up with a preliminary plan to create a focus group to examine and collaborate on selecting the resources and the tools to support and affecting the positive change we wanted to see in CMSD learners. So we originally had thought we would try a pilot in a small selection of 3 of our elementary schools. And it was so difficult to select 3 elementary schools because once everyone heard about what we were planning, everyone wanted in. And we knew our funds were limited. So we decided to then leverage some partnerships that we already had with some local industry to support our initiative. So we met with executives from Dyslexia Canada and came away with funds to support a fulsome K-3 literacy plan for all of our elementary schools. The plan was specific to the literacy program, and the funds they enabled us to prepare kits for K-3 teachers. We were able to get kits that included the UFly manual, a binder of resources, magnetic letters, folders, mini whiteboards, markers, erasers, literacy tables, clickers. We know teachers love to have the resources that they need, and we wanted to make sure they were tooled up. We then also purchased document cameras, and it also helped us to support the very much needed release time in order to provide in-service. And of course, we also gave decodable books. So we knew we were going to be using Acadience, and we knew we needed funding for that. So we headed back to the table, but this time we headed to talk to Rio Tinto. And Rio Tinto is another industry in Kitimat. So they were excited about what we were doing and gave us the money to fund the Acadience assessment piece and the training that we would need to support it. So in May 2023, after meeting with our focus group, a year-long training and assessment calendar was developed by Tina and myself, and it was provided to all of our PVP. And at the same time, we developed our 3-year plan. So I have to say, without that funding, it would have been extremely challenging for us to get this moving. So we're very excited about the fact that the ministry has now committed to that $30 million for the assessment piece. When we saw that, we were thinking, that's perfect. So it does come with a cost, and we were very fortunate to be able to leverage those partnerships.
Yeah, and I think that's the reality that a lot of districts are facing, right? Like it's not that like moving to evidence-based practices and switching to structured literacy will have an initial cost, but when you think about the thousands of dollars that have been spent on resources and tools that are not effective, that's having ineffective tools and having spent a lot of money on ineffective tools doesn't justify continuing to use those ineffective tools. So I'm really, really glad. When I heard your story, I thought, oh, that's like happy for you that you were able to get that. It's unfortunate that we have to go look to private industry to fund public education. It shouldn't be that way. And then the announcement came out and it was like, oh, okay, somebody's listening. Somebody is starting to understand this. So I'm really optimistic and hopeful that other districts will not have to look to private industry. Thankful as we are that they were able to support you with that and get you started. Because had they not, you wouldn't be going down this road and be able to be in a position of the role model for other districts to share your story and what you've been experiencing. So how regardless of how you got there, and that's good.
I also want to mention that when we went to Nova Scotia, we heard so many stories about students who had IEPs that once the schools had entered into this literacy plan, that a lot of those students no longer had IEPs because it wasn't that they had a learning disability, but they just didn't have the right background, I guess, in literacy. And then the other thing I also want to mention is that we never ever saw this as a teacher problem. We always saw it as a resource and a tool problem. So if we were able to give the teachers the resources and the tools, we knew that great things would come from it.
Yep. No shame, no blame, just shame. That's what I say. I said it, I think the first session, I'll say it again. I'll keep saying it. It's nobody's fault. We just have to understand what the issue is and then have the right tools and the right knowledge and information to be able to move forward and address it. So it's amazing that you got to go to Nova Scotia and see that firsthand. And I hope that Coast Mountain School District 82 can become one of those districts in British Columbia where people can go and visit and say, oh, this is what it looks like. And this is how one of many, right? So hopefully we can see that unfold. And I have to say, with IEPs and that is, and I would, in my own practice, and I think the literature, the research around the students who are diagnosed with dyslexia or referred for difficulties with reading, certainly in my own practice as a school psychologist, it's been 95% plus of students that get referred to me. The reason they're referred is because they're struggling with reading, and often it's at the word level. So they're having difficulty decoding. And sometimes these are students who are in the upper grades. So they're really struggling. They've been struggling for years, but now they're getting referred because it's a behavior problem, right? They've become such a challenge with behavior, but underneath that is of course the reading difficulty that's not been addressed. And it's not for lack of trying. It's not because people don't care or that they didn't try. They did try, and certainly the students probably try as well. But trying harder when you don't have the right tools and the right resources, you're just forever spinning your wheels and not going anywhere. So that's so it is really important when we think about our limited system, the limited amount of specialists that we have, whether it's speech and language pathologists, school psychologists, specialist teachers. You can't, I can't remember who said that quote, but you can't fix a tier 1 problem with tier 2 intervention, right? So if the problem is at the instructional level in tier 1, that's where we need to be focusing. And it sounds like you're doing that. So how is it going? What's the response been from
So
staff?
I think we're really gaining traction across the district to the point where our, like I mentioned, our 3-year plan is being condensed quite. So our anticipated plan was that we were going to do all the training with our K-3s this year, have them ready for next year, and then monitor and support them. However, our 4-6s were like, no, we want in on this. We want to have a continuation, especially our grade 3 teachers. Well, what happens next year? And then our junior high, same thing. They're like, we want something. We want to know how our kids are doing. They're struggling with their FSAs, and we want some supports. So next year we are going to be introducing Acadians all the way from not introducing, but from 4 to 8 we're adding to our portfolio. The big thing that we're going to be looking at, though, is the progress monitoring piece. And I did notice there was a lot of discussion on the chat as I'm watching today. So when they talk about the leveled and how do you know grade level, so the important thing is that to understand is Acadians actually assesses at the grade level what the expectation is for that grade. However, you could go all the way back into progress monitoring, all the way to kindergarten if you're in a grade 6, regardless, and then you're finding those gaps. For example, one of the biggest lessons I learned this year is that when we took a grade 5 student that was identified as a non-reader, all the way back, we could see that he wasn't able to put his nonsense word fluency. So it tells us right then that he's a sight word based student. So reteaching him how to put the sounds together and be able to encode and decode words properly were some of the things, the strategies then that we could then have our teachers, our learning resource teachers, work with those specific children on. So our big part of our work next year is to support our teachers in understanding how Acadians works and how they can use the tool beyond just the 3 assessments with the progress monitoring, and then making sure that we're providing solid tier 1 instruction and tier 2 within the classroom and with our learning resource people. And then we're going to continue on with our teacher focus group to see how do we continue to move our people forward in literacy. And what we've done in our last meeting that we were grateful that you attended and spoke at, Melanie, is we're looking at doing and developing a 90-minute framework for teachers to use. Now, we understand that teacher autonomy is very important and we don't want to take that away. But what we want to do is have a framework where teachers that are coming in or wanting to change, or perhaps even teachers on letters of permission, that they can access and they have a clear understanding of how their literacy can look, or how it can be structured within the day so that it's effective. And then the biggest part is some of the feedback that I've gotten from teachers are that they're feeling like they're unlocking mysteries. You know, the Acadians is providing them tools that they didn't know were missing in the assessment, which PM benchmarks would never tell them what's missing for that kid. They just didn't understand why they weren't progressing. Another teacher said that it's reinvigorating her teaching because she's finally getting kids that moving forward. And in our schools, often we have teachers that teach kids for multiple years, and they feel like they weren't doing a good job, but it was just something that they needed to figure out. I have a teacher that has drank the Kool-Aid, and where 90% of our kids are meeting the benchmarks in Acadians at the end of grade 1 this year. We have multiple examples of that with some of our staff that have figured out that this is the best approach. And a lot of them did it on their own before we even introduced any of this stuff. However, we are seeing that there is more of a buy-in. And I'm really proud to say that every school that we have K-3, and so we have 10 of them, there's at least 1 or 2, or if not more, champions that are promoting what we're doing and getting other teachers engaged. And some of the biggest highlights is the progress that we're seeing with our young people. You know, when I spoke about that one boy that said, I can't read, and now is exceeding he's exceeding in the progress he's making. So went from 5 to over 151, I think it was 151 in a 4-month period of time, because the mysteries are getting unlocked for him, right? So these are all big things that I'm seeing. And then my last one was that this is the tools we're putting in are for anyone. We had a little boy with autism that I spoke to his mom because I couldn't believe the progress that this child's made with the support that they're getting from home and at school. And, you know, for a little boy that self-identified as not being able to read at the beginning of grade 3 is now in the blue on Acadians. So went from red to blue. And again, this is not typical. So these are all successes that we're experiencing. And I'm not saying that it's only the tools, because it's definitely not. We have excellent educators that work in SD82 that really want to have something to affect change, positive change for all learners. So
Yeah, yeah. And I've said for a long time, like that's it, you shouldn't have to discover this information after you've paid for your education as a teacher to become a teacher. And that's my hope and my goal. And I know a number of us, Dr. Anna Vieira is here tonight as well too. And we're, there are a lot of us who are really working hard to try to this really is a systemic issue. And so in this series, we're trying to highlight that and have listening to teachers, boots on the ground, trying to make these changes and having you come in as, at the administrative level and how you're supporting teachers and your superintendent is supporting you and your teachers as well. It is a collective effort. But when we're looking at systemic change, we need to have all of these levels involved and break down these silos and be talking to each other, coming from a framework that is informed by the scientific evidence. When you understand, the importance of understanding reading and literacy development through those scientific models, it becomes so clear why the tools like Acadience are so aligned with those higher order, higher level skills that we want students to be able to achieve. When you have that underlying understanding, it makes sense. It then begins to click. And like you said, it doesn't matter if you're in grade 8 or grade 2 or kindergarten or whatever. Like if you're missing a foundational skill, it doesn't matter how old you are, you can go back to that and help students develop that. And that's unlocking those skills. Kids want to succeed, right? What gets frustrating is getting intervention after intervention, being pulled out and having all of these interventions or activities that aren't actually helping you move forward. And that's where kids start to feel really defeated and disengaged. So it sounds like a lot of kids are making great progress. A lot of teachers are doing wonderful things. You're both doing wonderful things. It's 8:30 right now, but I'm hoping we can maybe take one question from the chat.
Well,
if
one thing I just want to add, and I think
Oh,
it made
yeah.
a big difference, is that in working with Geraldine and Aaron, they afforded in my timetable where I went in with my team to do assessment. So they saw a district level person going into each school, and I sat with kids and I read with them, and I did the Acadience assessments 3 times in all schools. So I think that made a significant impact because teachers saw us coming in and doing the work with them. So
Yeah,
I think that's important too, right?
Absolutely. A lot of it is, and we talked about in other sessions, is about reallocating resources that you already have, right? And readjusting things. So get away from thinking about what level is the student, what is their grade level, what level, and what skill do they need? What is it that they're missing, and how do we provide that? So we have to think about individual skills for sure. So we probably are out of time. We are out of time. It's time for prizes. That's what it is. So let's do that. I
And
feel like can we have session 5 for
Melody,
just the
maybe you could
questions?
provide our email addresses if anybody wants to reach out and send their questions to us.
Yeah, we're happy to do
Absolutely.
that.
I love that. That would be great.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for joining us again for the workshop. We do have a prize. This week we are giving out a copy of, I don't know if it'll work if I hold it up here. Yep. Oh, I've got the blurred background so you can't really see it, but it's on the screen anyway. Next Steps in Literacy Instruction, which is a fantastic book. It's all about how do you take that data that you're getting from your screening assessments and your diagnostics and your progress monitoring, and how do you really action that in your classrooms to move things forward for students. We also, I will say, Dyslexia Canada runs a project for the Ontario Ministry of Education where we ran a book study of the next steps in literacy instruction this year. And all of the materials that we developed for that book study are freely available to anyone in Canada. If you visit us at onlit.org, you can download those slides if you want to host your own book study.
So next week is MTSS, everybody. I hope to see you back. Share the link, share the recordings, and let's finish off the series with the highest numbers yet.
Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.